This is, of course, an issue of global concern right now. It's not just here in Africa. And governing data is very complex. But I think that there's been a little bit of a misperception. There's this idea that keeping very personal information private and safe is somehow at odds with the opportunity to innovate and create new digital products and new digital services. And so our view is that, in fact, these two things don't have to oppose each other, and that what governments, especially governments in Africa, who are at a really critical point in the digital evolution of their countries, they can be really thoughtful about how you create the rules and the safeguards that govern personal digital data so that people's privacy and their civil liberties are protected, and they're able to share this data that they're generating online and get more benefit from it.
So you talked about rules and policies. So what kind of such policies or models best suit Africa, in terms of digital technology?
Right. Well, if you look around the world, there are really three different models that you see. One is what you see in the United States, which is quite laissez-faire, market-driven. The technology providers basically get to do whatever they want with the data that you are producing on their platforms, right? In other parts of the world, in more authoritarian governments, you're seeing true surveillance states come up where governments, in this case I'm thinking mostly of China, are taking people's personal behaviors and transactions online, and they're using that to coerce and manipulate and reward and punish people, right? The other model is the one that has been really developed by Europe in the last few years, commonly known as GDPR. And GDPR is great in that it gives people real rights over their data, rights of ownership, rights to be forgotten, and even rights to move their data around, right? But the problem is that it really requires a pretty sophisticated institutional capacity and a pretty sophisticated market to be able to get companies to, comply with all of these rules, right? And the sort of stance is more that they want to protect data. There's some interesting new thinking coming out of places like India and Estonia, where they say, why don't we take those rights, right? Still recognize that people have rights over their data, this new kind of asset, but also create systems by which they can safely share that data, make it available, right? And the idea there is that by making that data available, they're able to get more benefit from the data, whether it's better loan terms, better access to employment, all those sorts of things that can really unlock prosperity in someone's life.
But one may argue that in Africa, where digital literacy is very low, maybe there should be more control by governments to ensure, the internet or data is used effectively.
Yeah, so I think that, that you have to think about this in a really nuanced way. I do think that the government should be very responsible for the public provisioning of systems that make sure that people's wishes of how their data is used are observed. And you can think of multi-layered approaches where you have built-in kind of gates that open and close according to what somebody wants. And you can also think of oversight institutions such as ombudsmen, right? So that people have a way to actually get data that's incorrect about them or some sort of grievance with a technology provider addressed and resolved. So there are a lot of different ways to think about that don't necessarily mean the government has to be the sole gatekeeper, right? I think that devolving more control to citizens is going to be a really important part of making sure that the internet remains both open, but also a force that works for people.
All right, so lastly, another important thing, apart from low digital literacy, there's also, lack of digital infrastructure on the continent. So what should be done to make improvements?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussions about that right now, and it seems to me that the greatest opportunity for Africa is to come together across the continent to prioritize these investments in both connectivity, but also some really key features of a digital economy, right? So digital identity, digital payments, how data is shared by people and across borders. Because what seems to be really holding Africa back right now is the fact that there are 52 countries, and some of these borders are quite challenging for investment purposes, for companies to understand how to strategically build out their assets, and for people to have more of a role and more benefit in the digital economy.
All right, so my last question is a bit broad and has to do with the theme of this year's summit, boosting Africa's digital economy. So for you, what should be the main pillars to achieving that?
Gosh, there's a lot to be done, right? But I think what you most need to do is be able to unlock the entrepreneurship and the knowledge that exists in this continent. And again, I think that's the same. Countries need to work more closely together. They need to set joint priorities, and they need to stop talking and really get serious about aligning policy, regulation, and as I was just explaining, even co-investing in some foundational platforms that make it possible for entrepreneurs in this new digital age to really flourish.